I can't do it, John. That's impossible. Mary's words stopped me in my tracks. Sure enough, I had heard John. Wait, is she talking to my husband? Or people in bus missions? But no, John is on a business trip. It's hard to believe he'd call Mary from there. Yet, I continued to hear Mary's voice saying, John, that's why I can't. Then the next voice I heard left me stunned. Swap his medicine with that one. I only caught that one sentence, but it was unmistakably John's voice. Sorry, Amy. Brusque, the truth is, next day, Mary confessed something to me, and at the same time I felt shocked. I must protect Mary no matter what. And John, you're the only one I'll never forgive. I'm Amy Johnson, Joe Christians, a 55-year-old homemaker. Just the other day, my only son, Mike, got married, and I was feeling relieved. Mike had gotten a job a long time ago and moved out to become independent, but with this marriage, I finally felt the weight off my shoulders. My husband of the same age, John, and I were laughing, saying, now we've got to start thinking about our golden years. Originally, Mike lived alone in an apartment just a 5-minute drive from our house. For its creation, it was a studio. So, after the wedding, the newlywed couple moved to a bigger apartment. But this new place was even closer to us, about a 10-minute walk. John and Mike would say, it's comforting to be close. But it made me a bit anxious. Being close means you have to be careful not to overstep your boundaries. I once received a piece of advice from a friend. I'm rounding up to 60. At this age, most of my friends are in the same boat, becoming mothers-in-law. And from them, I got all sorts of useful advice. What shocked me the most was something about a daughter-in-law. People have two sides, you know. Just because she's smiling on the outside doesn't mean she's having fun. My friend said this with a serious face. Essentially, don't be fooled by just the facade of a daughter-in-law. It might be a twisted thought. Who would want to doubt the feelings behind a daughter-in-law's smile? But my friend's words had weight. In fact, this friend got along well with her daughter-in-law, seeing her frequently. She's like a real daughter to me, she would always say. However, it turned out the daughter-in-law had been forcing herself to get along. One day, all the pent-up frustrations burst out, and the daughter-in-law had a breakdown. They were on the verge of cutting ties, but somehow things calmed down. No matter the state or how you slice it, they're still outsiders. It's really about keeping the right distance. I've learned that the hard way. I can still recall the exhausted sigh of my friend, the sadness in her voice lingering in my memory. Mary, the girl who married my son Mike, is such a sweetheart, always smiling, a great listener, genuinely adorable. I was almost surprised she agreed to marry Mike. Even after they moved, when John and I dropped by their apartment, Mary welcomed us with that same smile, adding, feel free to come over anytime. I'd like to believe there's no deceit in her words and smiles, but to take everything she says at face value and to impose on her hospitality would be risky. It's that kind of consideration that's necessary for a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law to get along well. By being mindful in this way, we've managed to build a good relationship. We only meet when invited by Mike and his wife, and unless there's a specific reason, we don't initiate contact. It feels a bit lonely, but thanks to this, we've been getting by without any issues. Then one day, something unexpected happened when Mike and Mary came over for a visit. Wait, what did you say? I had to ask again, to which Mike repeated what he'd said earlier. So I've been assigned an overseas post, and we'd like Mary to stay with you. Mike has traveled abroad for work before, but this was the first time he was being stationed overseas. Turns out, the assignment would last at least 2 years with a chance of extension. 2 years is a long time. Isn't it safe for a couple to be apart like that? Wouldn't it be better if Mary went with you? Mary's got her job, and I'll be too busy overseas to be around much. It's more reassuring for her to live with you guys than alone in a strange place. Right, Mary? When Mike sought confirmation, Mary nodded with a smile. Yes, we didn't mind. If we could support our eldest son as his wife, we would be glad to. But did Mary really want this? Might she not prefer to go abroad with Mike, even if it meant being in a strange place rather than living with us, her in-laws? If Mary's parents were around, perhaps she could have turned to them, but sadly, both had already passed away. But she could just continue living on her own, right? The apartment is close by. And of course, we'd be happy to help out if needed. I thought it would be better for Mary to live independently. That's what I suggested to the young couple. But for some reason, Mary immediately said, that won't work. What do you mean, it won't work? Oh, it's just that. Mary hesitated. Mike then spoke for her. Mary has some past traumas, and she cannot live alone because of them. Mary nodded vigorously. Variations to... Well, we didn't know. Sorry about that. No, it's okay. If that was the case, living with us might be the only option. That's when John, who had been quietly observing, spoke up gently. If that's the case, she should stay with us. Don't hesitate. Mary is like our own daughter now. John said with a smile and added, plus, I'm often out late for work. It's better for Amy not to be alone. Having Mary, there would be comforting. Indeed, John's work didn't start too early in the morning, but he often came home around the last train at night. Having someone else around at such times was reassuring. Right. If Mary is okay with it, let's live together in harmony. I found myself on guard, but just like John had said, there were benefits to living together. Thank you. We really appreciate it. The pleasure is ours. And so it was settled that Mary would live with us. I was nervous about living together at first, but Mary turned out to be just as wonderful as ever. Good morning, Mom. Bert, if you'd like, how about joining me for breakfast? When I got up in the morning, the table was set with delicious-looking scrambled eggs and sausages, and there was steaming hot soup ready to be served. Bert didn't expect these. Thank you. I'm so happy to have someone cook for me. Brains are retrinsics, but wasn't it a lot of trouble? Not at all. Rations. I was making some for myself anyway. I hope it's to your liking. Let's dig in. Yum, or palagisi. This is delicious. Breathe out, I'm glad to hear that. Since Mary has work, I've taken on most of the household chores. But Mary never just left everything to me. On the contrary, she was always eager to help out with the chores to the point where I felt embarrassed. Mike sure has a good eye for people. Shim's lucky to have married such a wonderful woman like Mary. When I looked to John for agreement, he just smiled and nodded indeed. Life together seemed to have no issues. However, about a month after we started living together, I noticed a change in Mary. She still helped with chores whenever she could, but she started to spend more time alone in her room. After meals, she'd quickly retire to her room and wouldn't come out until morning. Even in the mornings, she used to have breakfast with us, but now she'd leave for work before we even got up. Did I do something to make her dislike me? Wished by the president, I feel so lonely. I couldn't help but vent to John when he returned home late one night. You sure you're not overthinking it? Besides, Mary might just need some time to herself, he replied. I know, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being avoided. Living together with us, Mary must have been putting in a lot of effort every day. Perhaps she had grown tired of that. Lost in thought, John patted my shoulder and said, Don't worry too much about it. It's not good for your health. And don't at Coyote, you go collapsing again. So I had previously been hospitalized for a stroke. Remembering that, John looked worried as he stroked my back. W and fine. I'm taking my medication regularly now. But maybe you're right. I should stop overthinking things. Restrictions. After that, Mary started to avoid me more overtly, but I tried my best not to let it bother me. Weekdays were still bearable, but weekends were hard. On weekends, John would go out by himself, leaving me and Mary together. Even if we didn't go out, we used to spend time talking over snacks at home. But lately, Mary had been refusing even my invitations. And, perhaps out of dislike, she started leaving the house every weekend. Are you heading out? I ran into Mary on her way to the entrance and asked her casually. She frowned and said sharply, It's none of your business, Mom. Just leave me alone. With that, she quickly left the house. I could clearly feel the rejection. It hurt more than I expected, as we had gotten along well in the beginning. Since then, I've naturally started avoiding Mary too. Will it be like this until Mike returns from abroad? Would it be better for us both if we stopped living together now? I wanted to discuss it with John, but he was never around when I needed him. He was away on a 2-week business trip. Dreading the weekends, I started going out more to avoid seeing Mary. I really didn't want to see Mary's face. So on that day off, I went out shopping as well. When I returned home, I could hear Mary's voice, coming from the direction of the living room. She seemed to be talking to someone. Since Mary wouldn't have guessed over without telling me, she must be on the phone. I'm home, I said, approaching the room. As I was about to slide open the door, I realized Mary was indeed on the phone. Sure enough, she was on the phone. I was convinced. I decided not to disturb her and was about to leave the area. That was when it happened. Mary raised her voice. No, I can't, John. That's impossible. Mary's words made me stop in my tracks. I definitely heard John. But no, John was supposed to be on a business trip. It seemed unlikely he'd call Mary from there. Yet, I could still hear Mary saying John. That's why I can't. Eternal peace. An inexplicable unease began to bubble up inside me. I approached the room where Mary was once more and listened quietly. I could hear Mary's voice, but not the person she was speaking to. Without hearing both sides, I couldn't be sure it was John, nor understand the context of their conversation. Frustrated, I couldn't decide whether to leave or to interrupt, so I just stood there. Meanwhile, Mary sounded troubled over the phone, repeating, "That's why it's impossible," several times. Was John asking her for a favor? Maybe I should offer to help. But what if she finds out I've been eavesdropping? It could worsen the already strained relationship between Mary and me. The thought saddened me since things were already tense as they were. As I was lost in my thoughts, Mary let out a pained cry. Almost simultaneously, I heard the sound of something dropping. Soon after, I heard John's deep voice fill the room. "Up this medicine with that one," he said. Probably Mary had dropped her smartphone, causing it to switch to speaker mode inadvertently. Mary must have quickly picked it up, because John's voice faded, and only hers was audible again. Before long, she said, "Understood," and then there was silence. She must have ended the call. I let out a sigh of relief, and quietly went back to the entrance. Taking another deep breath to compose myself, I called out with feigned calm, "I'm home." "Oh, welcome back," Mary replied. She emerged from the room, her face tense. I couldn't possibly confront her about the phone call. Her expression was rigid as she returned to her room. Why was she on the phone with John? And who was the henchman in the call? Above all, the ominous phrase "swap the medicine" stuck in my mind. I considered asking Mary several times, but couldn't muster the courage. I wondered if it's up herself. I wondered if Mary and John had been in touch behind my back. John's tone on the phone was uncharacteristically commanding. He doesn't even talk to me like that. What if Mary was plotting something behind my back? Or worse, what if John was threatening her? The unease wouldn't leave me, and I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I was out of sorts from lack of sleep. Wiping my heavy eyes, I was drinking water in the kitchen when Mary appeared. "Good morning, Mary." I greeted her with a hoarse voice due to the sleepless night. But her voice sounded even more drained and hoarse. As she looked down and murmured a quiet "good morning," I asked, "You don't seem well. What's wrong?" Could this be related to yesterday's phone call? Concerned, I peered at her face and was shocked. Mary's eyes, usually bright with double eyelids, were now dull and tired. Eyelids were swollen to slits. Her cheeks were wet with tears that continued to fall. "Lizzie, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I instinctively took her hand, and she gripped mine back tightly. "I'm sorry, Amy." Actually, through tears, Mary explained something to me. It was hard to believe and incredibly shocking. I was so shocked after hearing everything, I didn't know how to react. Just stunned by Mary's sudden confession, my mind went completely blank. As I stood there dazed, Mary's tears continued to fall. "I'm so sorry, Amy, so sorry." She kept repeating her apologies. Snapping back to reality, I hugged her tightly. "What are you talking about? It's not all John's fault." Even as I tried to soothe her, Mary's tears wouldn't stop. She cried so hard that she started sobbing uncontrollably. I stroked her back in hopes of calming her down. "I'm sorry. It's my fault for keeping silent. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, Mary. There are things that everyone finds impossible to share. Besides, Mike is okay with it, so it's not for John or me to interfere in a couple's private matters." Saying it out loud helped me start thinking more clearly. Anger towards John began to bubble up inside me. How many years have we been married now? We fought, even talked about separation. But I had always intended to spend the rest of my life with him. I never imagined he could do such a thing behind my back. After a while, when Mary had calmed down, we started to talk about what to do next. We should contact Mike before John returns from his business trip. Mary was reluctant to interrupt his work, but I disagreed. Mike would care about you more this job. How do you think he'd feel finding out about your troubles later? With that, Mary silently agreed. But when we tried to call Mike, we couldn't get through. Maybe he was busy or sleeping, we didn't know. So, we decided to send an email instead, summarizing the key points and asking him to call back when he could. 2 days later, John returned from his business trip. "Oh, I'm beat." He repeated this as he handed me his bag and coat. While taking them, I said mechanically, "Welcome back." He looked around the living room. "Something wrong?" he asked. Was just wondering where Mary is. He glanced around again. Oh, she's out running some errands. Did you need her for something? I asked with a smile, but he just looked away. No, not really. The bath's ready, I told him, and he just replied with a short okay and headed to the bathroom. Well, he bathed. I laid out the prepared papers on the table. I felt mixed emotions about confronting John with them. After decades of marriage, I never wanted to resort to such a thing. But after learning such a fact, I couldn't imagine continuing life with him. Oh, that was a great bath. John looked intent as he sat at the table with a towel around his neck. Normally, he would down a beer that was waiting for him. But noticing none was there, he squinted at me questioningly. Hey, where's the beer? Jux hasn't appeared today. Just look at this instead. Urged by me, John looked at the paper laid out on the table and his eyes went wide. What the eye went? What is this? Still staring at the table, John trembled. I clenched my fist tightly and said firmly, It's divorce papers. I went on a divorce. Ha! John shifted his gaze from the divorce papers to me. Divorce? Why? From John's voice and expression, I felt anger more than confusion. It was as if he wanted to shout, How dare you tell me you want a divorce? But you wanted this, right? The divorce? John flinched. No, I mean, that's not. He was mumbling, his words faltering. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. What's so funny? Because you're just so flustered. Oh, that's right. You didn't want a divorce. You wanted to remarry, didn't you? John fell silent, his eyes darting from right to left. I mean, I know everything. At my words, John's face turned ashen. Everything in Mikeson, that you've been cheating with another woman. That you tried to tamper with my medication to be with her. And most unforgivably, that you threatened Mary. Alvachine's face, already pale, now began to drip with sweat. As he did so, he kept repeating, No, that's not it, though he was denying it. I heard it all from Mary. For me, into Mary. Reached that backstab here? Mary had debts from before we got married. It seems that John found out about it when she was talking to Mike on the phone. She couldn't afford to live alone because she wanted to use her rent money for repayments. Once John knew she had no money, he must have felt superior to Mary. He had her do chores and treated her like a maid without me knowing. Since Mary couldn't afford to be thrown out, she couldn't stand up to John. She was keeping an eye on John every weekend to get away from him. That's when she caught him cheating. When she confronted him, he had the gall to say, Amy will be the one who gets hurt. Then, as if resigned, since it's out now, he commanded Mary to tamper with the medicine. So you thought of getting rid of me because I was in the way, huh? Having suffered a stroke before, I take medication daily without fail. It's the kind that keeps my blood from clotting. If I don't take it, I'm at high risk for clots, which could be life-threatening. Incredibly, John was planning to swap my medication with something else. Speak of all things, he was going to replace it with vitamin pills. For most people, vitamins are just a supplement, but for me, they could be poison. Depending on the type, they could promote clotting and increase my risk of thrombosis. In other words, John was trying to harm me. Anyway, I can't be with you anymore. Please, let's get a divorce. We'll discuss the settlement through years later. John looked at me with frustration, then turned his glare to Mary. Mary, how could you do this to me? Do you understand the consequences? Mary looked scared for a moment, but when I took her hand, she glared back at him. I stand. I'm fine now. I've Amy. What did you say? Growing confident, are we? John's eyes were bloodshot, and it looked like he might lunge at me at any moment. But then, the next thing I knew, there was a commotion at the front door, and Mike appeared out of breath. Are you okay? Mike stood in front of John, as if to protect Mary. Mike, why are you here? I received a call from Mom and rushed back from overseas. Dad, I'm disappointed in you. How could you use Mary's debt as leverage? John fell to his knees, looking flustered. At first, I just wanted to use her weakness to end things, but then I needed money. Either way, it's despicable. I don't want to see your face ever again. Get out now. But wait, Amy. Are you sure about this? You're a stay-at-home mom with no income. You won't be able to make ends meet. Don't worry. I'll be fine with the alimony I'll receive from you. And by the way, this house was inherited from my parents, so don't act all high and mighty. John was still trying to act tough, but when I threatened to call the police, he left in a hurry. After that, John and I got divorced. It turned out he had been secretly giving money to his mistress, and a good portion of our savings was gone. I now understand why he needed money. As part of the settlement, I decided to take all the remaining savings. John's future looked bleak, nearing retirement with no savings. And with his son disowning him, he's in for a rough ride. I doubt his mistress will stick with him through this difficult time, but honestly, I couldn't care less. Mike went back to work the day after we settled everything, looking like he didn't want to leave. Mary and I are still living together. I used the alimony I received from John to pay off Mary's debts. Her son and his wife wanted to repay it themselves, but with the current interest rates, it seemed impractical. Since it was John's money in the first place, I wanted to get rid of it quickly. Now the regular mother-in-law and daughter-in-law girls' nights are what I look forward to the most. Until Mike comes home, Mary and I will continue to live well together.